Okay, welcome along. Thank you very much for joining us today. Again, we are going to be focusing on the introduction to modern device management. Now, we're going to be covering this over 2 afternoons, as mentioned, and we'll hopefully go as deep as we can on each of these individual items. So the question is when we kick off all of this is why do we want to manage devices, right? So the number one point to consider here is that PCs are now no longer the dominant access to corporate information. We're typically seeing, mobile phones and iPads and, laptops that are moved around. So every Windows 10 device today largely is considered a device. It's not considered a desktop or a PC. You treat it as a mobile device, right? So what this means is we no longer have an environment where the PCs or the devices or the access to our corporate information is basically from a single location. So what this means is that we have devices, mobiles and whatever out there that are readily accessing corporate information. So take a CEO's phone, they're accessing emails, they're sharing files, they're potentially doing chats and so on inside Teams. All of that is is business confidential information, and that is being accessed on that device. So that means that device needs to be secured, needs to be thought about as how do we manage that? Now, that's a big change from the way things used to be, because in the good old days when we just had group policy, a domain controller, and everything connected via a blue cable, it was easy to manage because the network and the information was all within the boundary of four walls. Today, given the current health pandemic, we've also had challenges with people working from home, so they're accessing information potentially on their own devices, which their kids may also be using or their partners using. They may be accessing it purely on an iPad or whatever over sketchy Wi-Fi. How do we do all this? So the world is very different now when it comes to where the corporate information is accessed. The other thing is the challenge is these devices don't stand still anymore. So our devices are moving with us. Phones, obviously tablets more so, but again, people are decamping and moving to their cafe to, talk about to access Wi-Fi. How do we do that securely? Sharing information, or they're going to customers, or traveling on public transport. The amount of people back in the day when we were allowed to use public transport that actually were doing work or using their laptop or their device was always astonishing to me inside things like public transport. So again, keep that in mind. And many devices now have both personal and corporate data. I would assume that many devices that you use yourselves contain both personal and corporate information, stuff for your business and stuff for personal. So again, I have, for example, an iPad mini. This allows me to access my emails in a lie-back mode sitting on the lounge, but that same device I use to access Amazon Prime, read my Kindle, view Netflix and that sort of thing. So we're typically going to have a mixture of both corporate and personal data and applications on our devices now. Unsurprisingly, the devices now are being targeted. Now, over time, the security focus of devices has been pretty lax. People have sort of assumed that they can get away with not protecting devices. Now, that's changing. A day wouldn't go by without me getting 5 or 6 indications of a package has been delivered that I've missed out on. My COVID test is come back to me. Click here to get details. So if you haven't heard about the FluBot, basically what it does is that it tricks a user into clicking on a malicious link where it exploits a vulnerability in the device potentially, and then takes over that device, captures all passwords, logins, apps, data, and then propagates itself by sending other people on that contact list the same sort of infection mechanism. So without doubt, devices are now being targeted. Again, think about the situation where if you lost your device, I mean, you've got your banking details, you've got your personal details, all your contact details on there. you want to make sure that that device, A, is protected and the data is encrypted at rest, and also you've got a PIN number, and also that you could erase that if it is truly lost. So don't overlook the importance that devices have when it comes to security now and also into the future. So this is only going to become a greater and greater, a greater and greater capability. All right. So the idea here is that, as I mentioned here, we're not only going to risk the device being stolen, but we could also see a situation where the parent gives the phone to the individual, to their kid, and they could then accidentally or on purpose access the store, make purchases, download things, put on suspect apps, send emails out. So it's not just necessarily, malicious action. We're also subject to these sort of things, basically, as well. Okay. So at the end of the day, we need to manage our devices, no matter basically where they are in this day and age. All right. So if you have customers who are saying, well, look, I don't need to, I can't see the need to manage my iPhone, then you need to have a conversation and say, well, would you be comfortable handing your iPhone over to a stranger on the street and unlocking it so they could troll through it? Well, if you are not comfortable doing that, which most people aren't, then the chances are that the device does need some form of protection. And the good thing is we can do this quite easily and straightforwardly using the tools that come with Microsoft 365. So the majority of what we're going to speak about here is Microsoft 365 Business Premium. All right, so that's typically the first SKU, the entry SKU that includes the device management. We can add it on to other SKUs, but typically we want to have it already in there. So the idea here is that we want to use things like Intune in our Microsoft 365 environment to manage our traditional, the bulk of our knowledge workers doing day-to-day stuff, spreadsheets, documents, emails. But don't overlook the protection that's needed for first-line workers. People who are out there driving, doing deliveries, they need access to the technology. Technology is a key part of their business or their work requirements every single day. So at the end of the day, we need to think about not only the traditional sitting in an office or sitting in a home office, we need to think about frontline workers who may only have a tablet or a phone. How are we going to protect them and the information, because they are also connecting to corporate resources. So the SMB employee is a little bit unique here because, as I mentioned, they're probably going to have a device that they've brought to the environment, BYOD, and that could be anything from an Apple device to an Android device to a Windows PC. It could be hopefully at least current version of Windows 10, but is it Windows Home? Is it Windows Professional? And they're going to have their own personal information on there and be using it for personal tasks as well as what they need to do in a corporate environment. So again, how do we think about protecting all of this and not preventing them from getting their work done? Now, if you are in education, the good news is that a lot of this Intune stuff at Endpoint Manager has come from the education space, and they present some unique challenges. So Autopilot, which we will cover off, allows you to automatically provision machines, basically take them out and give them that OEM style shine before the next user accesses them. This has come from an education background where every term or every year machines have to be repurposed for the next class coming through. So Endpoint Manager from Microsoft combined with Intune is going to help solve or help accommodate a lot of these needs. Now, all of this means simply an opportunity for resellers. There's more and more opportunity for resellers to go in and provide these sort of management services. Now, many people are familiar with doing this from the days back in group policy, doing it on-prem in an AD style environment. Well, at its core, it's not a hell of a lot different today to that, except now that we use the cloud portal to push those out rather than doing it on a server. So the concept of pushing out policies to manage, maintain, and protect our environment is a well-worn one. So you'll see in the top right-hand corner, we can manage these devices with Configuration Manager. So Configuration Manager is Microsoft's typically enterprise on-prem way of managing things that they've had for many, many years, but now it's beginning to transition more and more to being a cloud-based deployment, because it's the situations I've talked about with devices being all over the place. Even big businesses have sent people to work from home because of health restrictions, and then it's a case of, well, how do we manage these things? How do we protect these things? So again, think about all these big banks and all the employees who are doing super secret things. They've all had to work from home as well. How do we manage? How do we control that when they're not sitting in an office building inside a CBD? So this is definitely the trend. Now, the benefit of that is, as an SMB provider and customer, you're going to get access to this enterprise-grade technology that you can implement for your SMB customers. Now, the reality is you shouldn't think of, enterprise, medium-sized, small-sized business. I think businesses are all the same these days. They still need this security, and we need to give them the biggest bang for the buck. And again, with things like endpoint management, cloud deployment, we can absolutely do that. So the idea here is we want to reduce the risk. So how do we make sure that we reduce the risk as best as possible when it comes to managing the devices? We do this largely, with policy. We also want to be able to roll out devices without having to touch them. So the good news is you can order a PC from someone like Ingram. They can deliver that to the customer directly, drop ship, and the customer can open it up, connect to their internet, and the device can be totally provisioned end to end. You can then manage it for its lifestyle. You can then wipe it, erase it, retire it, and then that user can pass that device on to somebody else in their family. So no longer do you need to see the device. No longer do you need to touch the device to provision it. It can all be done out of the box and all be done basically in the cloud. Now, the other mix in all of this is to start thinking about a world where physical devices also begin to be minimized, and we're moving to technologies like Windows 365. So with the container shortages, supply chain challenges, the chip shortages, many people now are probably very familiar with the fact that you can't get as many PCs, devices, printers that you want, that customers want, simply because they're just not available in the supply chain. How do we accommodate customers? Now, if you stop and think about the economics of it and think about our place in history at the moment, hopefully as everybody moves from lockdown into an environment where it's more open, businesses are beginning to open up, do more business, there's going to be a massive boom in people wanting to, upgrade their technology, buy more technology, refurbish their technology. The government's providing lots and lots of tax benefits to do this as well. So there's going to be this huge demand for devices and, IT stuff. And guess what? There's simply not going to be the capability to buy all the stuff everybody needs. So this is where you need to get smart and think about it. You know what? Maybe for the time being or in the short term, we can look at virtual devices like Windows 365 as an option as well. And guess what? They can be zero-touch provision, just like normal devices can as well. Now, we've got the capabilities built into these consoles to give us scores. So one of the most common things that I would suggest you sit down and have a look at, if you haven't done so already, is the Secure Score capability inside a tenant. So just quickly, let us go into a portal here. So if we go to portal, portal.office.com on my demo tenant, and we go into the admin console. All right. Actually, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go into security, beg your pardon. So let me go into all the options here and then find S for security. There we go. And in the Security Center here, you will see an option for Secure Score. Now, Secure Score is basically Microsoft's, I suppose, scoring system for the security and environment. So you'll see Secure Score over here on the left. If you haven't seen this, this will give me an evaluation in a second. And you can see that it rates my tenant, or this demo tenant, 67%, all right, out of all the capabilities that are provided. Now, if we go up to the top corner here and select current license score, that will show me the maximum that can be achieved with the licenses that I do have available or applied. Now, not only will it give us a score, it's a very good benchmark, it will also tell us what needs to be improved. So we can then go and prioritize these by the points, and we can go in and enable this through our environment. So if I go on and select that, you'll see that I get quite a detailed set of information. You'll see that I can also manually resolve it. So even if you are using third party or you're not going to do it at the moment, then you can go in here and put in the reason why, and then say, please don't score that item there. So the idea here is to think about using these sort of benchmarks as a really good customer-facing tool that you can speak to customers about. And again, if we look at the metrics and the trends, that will also show you the comparison of your score to, no data there yet. So your score compared to others who are of the same environment. Now, the average security score is generally around 16 to 20. It's pretty woeful. So if you can, the higher you can get that, obviously, the more secure you are. Now, everything we talk about here in Endpoint Manager and whatnot will feed into Secure Score. So once you add in Intune, once you add in device management, that is all going to feed into Secure Score and give you the capability to, again, bubble all this up into a single number that is a very good discussion point or target to work with customers. Okay. All right, so Mitchell's got a comment here. We believe the barrier to expanding SMB 365 service offerings are the content learning, reviewing of different SKUs and possible combos. Sessions like this are, of course, super helpful. What is the best catalog of up-to-date SKU offerings for SMBs to understand and help sell the solutions? All right, so my advice to you is that what you need to do is you need to focus on selling 2 SKUs. My advice to you is to sell E5 as your premium SKU and Microsoft 365 Business Premium as your secondary SKU. Focus on those 2, and you should not look at selling Business Basic. Don't look at selling all these other SKUs. Focus on those 2 as your primary go-to-market. So the gold level E5, the the recommended version is going to be Microsoft 365 Business Premium. Now, if you want to have direct comparisons between them, my advice to you is to go out and have a look for Office 365 service descriptions. That will give you the most up-to-date settings or the most up-to-date comparisons between all the plans. So if we go in here and select that and scroll down here, right, it will show you all of the comparisons of the plans side by side by side. Now, the good thing about the service descriptions, as you can see here, it's quite involved. It's quite detailed in what it does, and it will be regularly updated. So again, the best place to keep up to date with what SKU is, what facility or capability is included in each SKU is to look at the service descriptions. And again, just go out and do a search for the service descriptions there, and it will have the comparison. But my strongest advice to you is to focus on 2 or 3 SKUs that you go to market with, build your offering around that, and don't try and be the Amazon, Woolworths, Coles of Office 365, Microsoft 365. Pick a SKU that you know really well, has all the components you want. You can build the set of features and the marketing around that, your go-to-market, and you sell that. Now, if someone comes to you and says, yeah, but I want the cheapest because it's a comparison, I want the cheapest thing because Google's got the cheapest thing, that's when you would basically also look at it and say, well, maybe they're not the customer for you. Okay, so again, remember, all customers are not good customers. right? Work out what your go-to-market offering is, okay? And then, right, when you go to your market, it's going to be much, much easier to find those good customers that align and resonate with you. Now, as Joel's also indicated, the Microsoft 365 maps.com by Aaron Dinigan is also really good. I've found that of late, unfortunately, has started to become somewhat complex because there are, again, so many offerings out there. So the idea here is you can go in here and you can say, look, okay, I want to, have a look at the E3 stuff here. You'll see that you can then, compare the diagrams down the bottom there. You've also got the save diagram. So he's done this really, really well. He updates this. This is, remember, largely a not-for-profit or a personal interest thing of his. So again, it's not an official Microsoft document. If you want the official Microsoft document, again, I would suggest the service descriptions, but Aaron certainly does a really good job of bringing that together for you. But just again, beware that that is not an official Microsoft site, but it certainly probably is more than adequate. My commentary is, like I said, focus on Microsoft 365 Business Premium as your standard go-to-market offering, E5 as your advanced or gold offering, and then if you want, you could build something around the business basic. But offering everything to everybody means you end up being nothing to nobody. So again, you make the choice, you pick the SKUs, you pick your offering, bundle it all up, put it under your name, don't even call it Microsoft 365, go to market and sell it. And then if you need to change something in the package over time, you can do that because you're not selling licenses. Okay, the smaller you are, the less you should be focused on selling licenses, the more you should be focused on selling your unique value to market. All right, so you'll see that we also get advanced analytics, we get unified management, and one of the big benefits of all of this is this full stack integration. So as mentioned, if you take your devices and enroll them into an endpoint manager, that will bubble up into SecureScore, that will bubble up into Cloud App Security, that will bubble up into Azure Sentinel to give you a better idea of what your environment is basically all about. So let me quickly show you sort of the end game here. So this is my production Azure Sentinel. So you can see here it's analyzing over 700,000 individual entries, tells me where I've got to worry about anything and I can deal with it. But what it also gives me, because the metrics of my devices are being bubbled up into this, I can create a dashboard, a monitoring dashboard here, and you'll see this is one I've created. But down here, you'll see I can also see things like the CPU usage over time, the disk storage, how full each of the disks are on devices. So again, all of that is capable, and that's one of the benefits that we get, excuse me, because we have this full stack integration. All right, so this is a really powerful benefit because we can integrate it in portals like Azure. We can integrate it using things like Microsoft 365 Lighthouse. We can also use scripting, PowerShell to access it. So this single stack, rather than having to go to multi-consoles and have different sets of licensing, really does pay benefit in the long run. All right. So in a nutshell, what we want to do here is you want to manage devices, but we also need to think about managing the applications on those devices, because some of those devices are going to be brought by people into our business that we don't own, that the company doesn't own. But we still want to manage the corporate information. So again, think of this as largely two major components, what they call MDM, device management, and MAM, application management. Now, you get the most security by doing both together. So all my devices have MDM and MAM on them, but you can do either or you can do them together. So you do have that flexibility. So MDM is typically a corporate-owned device, and MAM is going to be typically a BYOD scenario, and you've got full control of how you want to do that, how you want to manage that. But in a nutshell, in a general purpose rule of thumb, that is the way to go and think about that. So Michael is asking, hang on, let's go back one. So Sasha, I have 20 users, 10 on basic, 10 on premium, 20 devices. How can I manage them with Endpoint Manager? Well, Business Basic does not support Endpoint Manager, so none of those devices will be supported. And if you're talking Business Premium, then those 10 devices that are on Business Premium have a license for Intune. My advice to you is Business Premium all the way through. One consistent license is going to give you additional security, additional management, additional capabilities, right? If you need that, you can add individual Intune licenses or other to give you that Intune. But my advice to you is that the benefits of Business Premium outweigh all the other capabilities here as a single bundle. The value is enormous. And I would just standardize on that and not be doing Business Basic at all, because it's just too limiting if you want to do this in any serious manner. So the license, everything in Microsoft 365 is per user. So when you buy a Microsoft 365 license, it's a per user license. Now, when we get into the policies, we can target policies at a user or a device. And this is where you need to make that decision. Typically, it's going to be per user, but if you have a device that multiple users are accessing, then you can target policies at a particular device, but each of the users who access that require an Intune license. So Microsoft 365, all the licensing is per user. There is no device licensing, but you can target policies at devices if you want. These licenses are via the Maps offering for partners. So yes, Maps basically provides the capability to do Intune. If you go in and have a look, the way that Maps works is they provide you with the licenses for Office 365 and then also for the EMS suite, Enterprise Mobility Suite, which includes Intune. So rather than being a Microsoft 365 license that you get as a partner, you get the Office 365 component, the EMS component separate, and you can certainly use them together just like Microsoft 365. So they definitely are available. Okay, so the idea here is as I said, Sasha, the idea here is that the licensing is per user, not per device. Okay, so it means that if the user has an Intune license, any device they use is covered by that license. All right, it's a per user license. Now, if you have any questions about licensing, right, we need to probably go and talk to the good people at Ingram about this. All right, this is not a licensing session. Okay, I don't want to get bogged down in all of this licensing, whatever. My advice to you and the baseline I'm working on is that everybody is focused on either Microsoft 365 Business Premium or E5. If you have anything else besides that, yes, it can be accommodated. You can buy the licenses individually, okay? But for the licensing specific conversations, I suggest that you, again, talk to the good people at Ingram to help you understand exactly what it is. And I'm going to base this discussion going forward on the minimum capability being Microsoft 365 Business Premium, because it includes everything you need. And I will strongly, once again, recommend it is the go-to SKU that you should be providing for SMB without any question. Okay, because it provides all these capabilities. Okay. So all of this, all the management of MDM, MAM, and our devices is done with Microsoft Endpoint Manager today. Now, back in the day, there was a technology called Intune. So those of you who can remember that back in the day, Intune was actually older than BPOS. It was started off as a way to do Windows upgrades, and then it became a device management and so on. It's matured over time. So we'll cover all of this in detail, but Intune is just one capability of Endpoint Manager. You can also use Endpoint Manager to do reporting, analytics. You can also connect it to your on-prem environment if you're using Config Manage, but it is going to be the go-to mechanism for your device management. Now, the console looks something like this. So rather than showing you a static slide. Why don't we go out and have a look here? So if you have a look at Endpoint Manager here on my demo environment, you'll see that I have a familiar menu down the side. You'll see that I have a list of any devices that are enrolled in this environment. You'll see that I've got my Windows, I've got potentially my iOS and my Android devices in there. I can then start applying, things like compliance policies to these. I can then start applying configuration policies to these as well. If I go into my endpoint security, I can again provide or apply a range of additional policies. So baselines, disk encryption, antivirus, account protection, all of that I can provide through this console. Now you can go to this console right now. You can have a look. So if you log into your tenant and then go to endpoint.microsoft.com, you'll be able to see this in your own environment. You may not have the licensing to implement it, but this console is readily available. Now, if I also go, you'll see that if under apps, this is where I do my application management. So this is where I can go in and, for example, add the software that I want to push out and to manage inside my environment. So you'll see here I can choose it from all the different stores. I can manage Edge, all of that sort of stuff. So that is the application side of it. So MDM, device management, which we'll deal with first, then MAM, application management. And then if you have a look down here, you'll see that you also get all of this sort of reporting and analytics built into it. We get the ability to look at Defender AV. We can look at things like our Windows updates, and we also get our endpoint analytics. And this is where Microsoft is spending a huge amount of time at the moment. And endpoint analytics will tell you, for example, why machines are slow to boot, what's holding it up, how it could be improved, how it could be made faster. So this is a really, really powerful way to get performance information and operational details on all of your devices. And again, it puts it into a score that we can then go and analyze. So if you haven't had a look, go and have a look at endpoint.microsoft.com. And just remember that based on the licenses that you have access to, some of the features may not be available to you. Okay. Now, one of the big differences in this day and age is the fact that we have to manage, as I mentioned, multiple operating systems, and some of those are not Microsoft operating systems anymore. Okay. Now, one of these is iOS. So we're talking iPads, iPhones. Now, again, two scenarios here, a BYOD and a corporate owned. BYOD, bring your own device. That could be a phone. How are we going to manage that? What needs to be managed? Typically in a BYOD, we want to manage the application. So what that means is that we want to manage Outlook app on the device. We want to manage OneDrive on the app, but we're not going to manage the user's personal photos, their Netflix, their Facebook. Any of that is not corporate data. The business won't manage that, only the corporate data. On the other side, if you want full control of the device, then you would make it corporate owned. Now, the big benefit here of going corporate owned is if that device is lost, then you can do a complete factory reset of that device and wipe it out, basically, so there's no information on there at all. If you have a BYOD scenario, the best you can do as a business is wipe the information inside the corporate app. So if the phone gets lost, the user calls you up, you as a business can wipe any of the data in the Outlook mobile app, but you obviously can't then wipe any mail that is collected in the Apple Mail client because that is not managed. So that is the limitation when you go BYOD. The business can manage, control, select policy on any of the corporate apps and corporate data, but none of the personal stuff. If a user loses their phone and they want it wiped and they haven't got it under full control, then basically they're sort of left to their own devices to do that. So again, best practice is to have corporate owned devices that are MDM and MAM together. However, if that's not possible, you can do MAM, which is typically aimed at BYOD. Similar sort of story when we come to Android. You'll see we've got a number of different scenarios around work profiles, kiosk, managed. All of these can be accommodated. Now, One of the challenges you're going to note in this space is simply the volume of options that are available to you. And this can be very overwhelming at first. So don't get put off by that. My advice, as always, is keep it simple. Start with the simple stuff. I'll take you through, give you my recommendations. But as with the licensing stuff, right, have a look at it and say, you know, we are going to be more profitable selling this license or focusing on this license, which has what we want, rather than trying to sell bits and bobs and all these little bits and pieces and trying to be everything to everybody. All right. And I think there'll be far more success by focusing on that and getting really good at that rather than trying to be average at everything else. Now, if you do have a Mac environment, Intune will support the ability, Endpoint will support the ability to manage your Macs or manage the Macs out of the box, but it is not as comprehensive as some of the third-party offerings out there like Jamf. So Jamf gives you that really low-level detail access, controllability of Macs. Now, the good news is that Jamf can be integrated with Intune to give you that control, that capability, but obviously Jamf would be an additional purchase for your Mac fleet if needed. So if you just want the basics around the Mac environment, then that's going to be accommodated for you. But if you want anything more detailed or more low level, then you may need to look at a third party option. Again, the advice is going to be for you to look at something that does integrate well with the Intune Endpoint Manager. So there are lots of options out there. It's going to make it much easier to control it from a single console. So in essence, with our Endpoint Manager, we can go in and we can manage our Windows devices, we can manage our iOS, we can manage our Android, we can manage our Macs. Coming very shortly will also be Linux machines, if you do have those out in the space. They're a bit rare in SMB, but I suppose they are out there. And also don't forget the virtual side of a house as well. So we can manage all that in this single console quickly and easily. When we manage it, we'll be doing it by MDM and or MAM as well. So as mentioned, the concept here is that you want to get your devices as a best practice under MDM. MDM is going to give you control down to the operating system level. It's going to allow you to determine the lock screen, the PIN number, how many digits in the PIN number, whether it's complex, what apps can be installed. All of that sort of stuff can be controlled using MDM on iOS, Android, Windows 10. Now, the layer above that, as mentioned, typically for BYOD is going to be the MAM, Application Management Policies. Now, imagine a scenario where a user brings in their own personal iPhone. They are happy for the company to put on the Outlook mobile app on the device, for the company emails to come into the Outlook mobile device, for them to interact with company data inside the Outlook app, but they are not prepared to surrender any more control of their device to the company. So the company would then push out the Outlook app onto the device. It would then push out the corporate data. The corporate data would then be subject to policy set by the company. If that employee leaves or is terminated, then the company could erase any information in that Outlook app on that device. They could also prevent copying and pasting. So, for example, the user who has this device could not take an attachment from their corporate Outlook mobile app and paste it into their Gmail or save it in their G Drive or put it in Dropbox. But the key here with all of this is about policy, right? Anytime you hear anything that starts with P in the Microsoft space, it's an opportunity for a reseller to work with the customer and to come up with a deployment that suits that environment. Someone, a human being, is going to have to deploy, manage, maintain, and configure a policy. Okay, that's where the value add here is, okay, what policies make sense? What are our best practices? What's going to protect our devices without restricting them too greatly? So all of this capability, all this functionality is fantastic, but someone has to go and implement this. All right. Now, one of the benefits of setting up MAM, as I mentioned, is selective wipe. We can go in and say, right, we can target selective, applications here. So again, if we go quickly into this, we go into the Endpoint Manager. I don't know if I've got any apps in there at the moment, but you'll see down the bottom here, I've also got this option here called App Selective Wipe. So what I would do here is I would go in and create a wipe request. I would then select the user, select their device, and then the information in that application would then be removed. So that's the concept behind a selective wipe. So we as a business can erase or control the data that is in the applications we've defined as corporate and not touch the Netflix, the Twitter, the Facebook that the user has for their personal space. So that's the concept, again, preventing copying and pasting. I'll hopefully be able to show you that. So this is really powerful because, again, it prevents corporate information being moved to non-corporate locations. But again, you need to be careful here because it can cause pain. Now, my example, right, is I was on a long flight. I arrived. I wanted to get to the hotel to relax, I suppose, and I wanted to call the shuttle. I went to my OneNote, which was a corporate app with corporate information, copied the phone number for the shuttle, pasted it or tried to paste that corporate information into my dialer, and it wouldn't allow it because the dialer was considered to be a non-corporate app. And that was quite painful until I fixed that down the track. So again, all of this sounds really, really good until it isn't in practice. So as always, my recommendation is inflict this on yourself first. Live the dream, drink the Kool-Aid, whatever you got to do this first so you know what works, where the problems are. This is going to be a challenge. No, we shouldn't do this. And I'll call out some of these as we go along. Now, what I see, unfortunately, is people get all G'd up about this and this great technology, and they turn it on to the max, and then they can't do anything. So again, my advice, as always, is do things in steps, understand each one, because it is possible to lock yourself out of your device and your tenant if you aren't particularly careful. All right, so Carmen has a question here. If the device is wiped, does that remove just the corporate data? Yes. So if I have Outlook on iOS managed, right, the Outlook app on iOS managed, and I issue that application wipe for Outlook, only the corporate data, the corporate emails, the Azure AD, the Office 365 data will be removed. If they have a personal account in their Outlook as well, that will be kept. So again, an application wipe will only wipe corporate data from corporate apps. And we'll talk about how we define both of those. But that's what application wipe gives you, that capability. So at its core, our application policies are designed to enforce those that have the rights to access the data. We also prevent that from ending up on other devices it's not. So we can enforce the capability so that information can be not put on a USB drive, cannot be transferred, cannot be copied and pasted to other locations if that is not allowed. We can also encrypt. We can also force encryption at rest. So one of the things we can do, so if you have a user who's working from home, they have a Windows 10 Home that cannot connect to Azure AD. That, however, can be used to synchronize data from OneDrive for Business. So if you do not have a policy to set up using application management, that synchronized data is copied down to that local machine unencrypted. And most machines these days don't have encryption at default. They haven't got BitLocker turned on. So therefore, you're allowing corporate data to live on non-corporate machines that you don't control and for it to be there unencrypted. These policies would allow you to encrypt the data even on a Windows 10 home machine so that if that user left, they would not be able to access that data anymore because they don't have a valid login. So this is the power that we can use with these application policies to really control corporate data. And this is what it's largely down to. Devices are largely irrelevant. Hardware is largely irrelevant. Infrastructure is largely irrelevant. It's all the same these days. It's a commodity. The value add is around compliance and protecting corporate data. Because if you think about it, what's the difference between you and everybody else on this call? You're all doing IT, you're all MSPs, you're all doing the same thing, you're all selling Microsoft 365. What's the difference between you and the person next to you? Right, it's your secret sauce. It's the way you do things. It's the procedures. It's your customer service. It's your approach. Okay, that's the value add here. Your policies, your best practices are the value add here. And that's what we need to enforce. And we talked about the app level wipe. All right, so let me have a look over here. MAM doesn't work in Mac. So again, Benjamin, the idea is I'm no Mac expert. It will work at a certain level. So again, you can implement MAM, right, in a Mac environment because it is largely independent of the device, but it depends what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so there's not one simple answer here, especially when it comes to Macs, which aren't Windows PCs. So the answer is yes, but it depends, and we need to know what the particular approach is. But I will tell you that the answer with Macintosh is always going to be 80 to 85% of what you can do in Windows. So there's always going to be a caveat because of limitations with Mac. And the last 15% of that is if you need that, you need to look at integrating a third-party package like Jamf or whatever to get that low-level detail if you want. Generally, for most things, 80% of people, what comes with Intune is more than adequate. Okay, but if you do need something else, look at it, integrating a third-party product. The Microsoft's recommendation is generally something like Jamf to do that. Does MAM work on Macs and iPads? Yes. I guess it would need DLP in place to function. Benjamin, DLP is not an MAM application. DLP is an outbound scanning technology. All right, so data loss prevention basically looks at the content of the file, looks for a match, such as a credit card number, driver's license, passport number, and then applies policies on where that data can be sent outside the organization. It's not going to prevent data being moved around in a device by a user who has rights. It is designed to prevent information being moved from a user with rights to a user without rights, typically with email. So DLP is somewhat different to application management, right? So again, the idea is application management is about defining the corporate app and the corporate data and determining when one can be stored in the other. DLP is a scanning, typically an outbound scanning technology looking for a match to prevent information being sent to third parties who do not have the rights to access it. Is MAM a replacement of group policy? No. Endpoint Manager and Intune is the replacement of group policy. These two combined are the replacement for group policy, but they are largely infinitely more powerful. Okay, if you are familiar with group policy, Endpoint Manager, Intune, everything I'm talking about here, all of it replaces group policy. Group policy is limited to working only inside a domain, only in an environment with a domain controller, and is not being updated, improved, or enhanced by Microsoft in any way, shape, or form. Their whole resources are moving to using Endpoint Manager, modern device management, whatever you want to call, but everything we talk about here is replacing group policy and making it redundant, but also giving you far more capabilities. Okay, any other questions before we take our first break? Any other questions? All right, so I will stop the recording.